To talk more about the Fair Elections Act and other developments from this week in federal politics, I'm joined by three members of Parliament. Erin O'Toole is the Conservative MP from Durham in Ontario and also Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade. Murray Rankin is the NDP MP for Victoria in British Columbia. And Francis Scarpaleggia is the Liberal MP for Lac Saint Louis in Quebec. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Erin O'Toole, let's go to you first. Should the government be listening more carefully to some of the criticism of the Fair Elections Act that's coming from people like Sheila Fraser?
Well, Mark, we're listening carefully right now. The bill's actually at committee stage, and I've been at many of the committee hearings myself and look forward to Ms. Fraser next week. Certainly there's been some people express some concern, but I found that a lot of people don't realize where this legislation comes from, and it comes from the Supreme Court of Canada decision from the troubles in the 2011 election and an Election Canada report that showed some significant problems with the administration of our elections. So good portions of the bill come from that. Certainly our solutions to fix some of the problems have led to some heated dialogue, but we're not going to deter from the principles of the bill, which is to make it much more fair and modernize the regulation of it. But the committee stage, we're hearing from a diverse set of voices, and you know, that's where amendments may come from if we feel the spirit can be kept, but some changes made to keep it fair.
All right, Murray Rankin, what's your reaction to that? Do you feel like the government is open to amendments here?
I'm shocked. I mean, here we have hundreds of academics now. The former Auditor General, who this government praised when she was slamming Liberal corruption, who's now said this is an assault on democracy. I had hundreds of people in my riding of Victoria out to protest this. They won't take the committee on the road to hear from real Canadians. I think people are beginning to wake up that this government has gone one step too far in trying to suppress the right of people to vote in this country.
Francis Scarpaleggia, what about the argument around vouching and the fact that the government, Pierre Poilievre, the Minister of State for Democratic Reform, has said, well, look, it's not that hard to vote, you just need to produce some ID?
Well, we've seen experts. I've never seen such a wall, a thick wall of expert opinion against a particular government initiative in all the time that I've been following politics. I've never seen anything like it. We know in terms of the Supreme Court, there are many who feel that the provision to eliminate vouching would actually not be constitutional because, as the court has said, the right to exercise your vote is more important than the particular procedure involved. So I don't think, I think there may be a problem there, but you know, I really don't think that things are going very well for the government, and I think Canadians are starting to notice because when you have Sheila Fraser, when you have Mark Mayrand, when you have Harry Neufeld, I mean, it's on. You know, it's becoming pervasive, and Canadians are catching on for sure.
Mark, I think it's important to address that the Supreme Court decision that I referred to earlier actually provides clearly for the government to put in place some administration, some regulatory compliance in the election. In fact, the decision said clearly that it's important to make sure that people that have the right to vote, vote, and that procedures to ensure that citizenship, residence, those sorts of things that lead to qualifying for voting are also administered. The interesting thing here...
People aren't necessarily, like Sheila Fraser, are not necessarily saying you shouldn't be doing anything. They're saying they don't like what you're doing. So are they all wrong, all these people who have commented on it?
Some of the people expressed concerns about some disadvantaged groups being impacted by vouching. But here's the reality of the situation is groups like First Nations, disabled, homeless, their issue is not showing ID. Their issue is voter participation. They're disenfranchised for reasons that are socioeconomic and a range of others. It has nothing to do with ID.
That's just
and Murray and his colleagues...
That's absolutely not so, Mark.
They don't understand it. The VIC card, the voter information card, which the NDP constantly referred to as the voter identification card, is made up of sources that the government have on people. If they're already at the margins, they're not getting these VIC cards either, so they should really study up on this better.
Hundreds of thousands of people use the VIC card to vote. The yellow card you get in the mail has been one of the key pieces of federal identification, perhaps the only one that actually has your address on it. In my writing, hundreds of people vouch for others, especially the homeless. And in terms of the constitutionality of the Fair Elections Act, which I think will be found wanting, one of the key things that saved it on other challenges has been the existence of vouching, the ability to say, you know, this person, my neighbor, indeed lives here. I promise, I so swear, and I say the same thing. 500,000 people, mostly disadvantaged people, seniors, students, and Aboriginal people used that technique, which this government wants to absolutely eliminate. I say in doing so, they've created a bill that will be found unconstitutional. Why don't they agree with the hundreds of scholars now and elections officials and Sheila Fox, who so many Canadians respect, and just drop this ridiculous law?
Okay, let's move on to the subject of the Victims' Rights Bill. And Francis Scarpaleggia, let's start with you on this. The government promised to put victims at the center of the justice system. Do you think this bill does that?
Well, what I think the main concern is around this bill is that the government is raising expectations that can't be met, and also that it's more, it could be more of a public relations exercise in the end, which would leave victims severely disappointed. And I'm just essentially echoing what experts have said in the last couple of days on this. So it remains to be seen, really, what it accomplishes in reality. And what's also important is that, you know, quite apart from the bill or the law, that victims are given the resources they need to heal. And some victims have said, you know, going through the justice system, you know, just left me angrier than if I hadn't participated in it. So does this bill create meaningful participation, or are victims going to just sort of feel quite disappointed after their experience with the system?
Aaron O'Toole, there have been some victims advocates who have come forward already in the past 24 hours saying this doesn't go far enough. It doesn't give victims the right to speak in court with their reaction to plea bargains and that type of thing. So what's your response to that reaction, that it doesn't actually put victims at the heart of the justice system?
I think it certainly does. And the fact that this is the first measure of its kind, this first sort of federal Victims' Bill of Rights, which came as a result of consultations for many years, is a fact that we are trying to put the rights and consideration for victims into our justice system in several ways, to make sure that they can have their voice at several steps in the system, from sentencing to parole and that sort of thing, but also to provide potential for restitution, to protect their privacy and protect them. Certainly, if people are strong advocates, there's probably more we can do, but we've certainly planted a firm flag in the ground to say, look, throughout our entire criminal justice system, the rights of the victims should always be respected, because in serious crime, the victims are often forgotten about, and they are the ones that have had their rights impacted. So we've got to make sure that people understand what this Victims' Bill of Rights does. We're very excited about it because it is a first for Canada.
All right, Murray Rankin, let's get your reaction on this.
Mark, I totally agree with the need to give victims more presence in our system, but I also agree with Francis that resources, actually putting money rather than just photo ops at this, is going to be necessary. I notice in today's press that a number of the experts pronounced themselves disappointed. Frankly, it was surprising to me to see Ben Perrin, the Prime Minister's lawyer, former lawyer, calling it disappointing. I saw the head of the Criminal Defense Lawyers Association saying, quote, victims are being used, and I saw the Ottawa head of Victim Services casting aspersions on this bill. So those who actually know about this stuff are very disappointed. I find that something we have to look at more carefully. But the need to give victims a bigger voice in the system, absolutely. I just don't think this does it enough.
Okay, we're short on time, so I want to give each of you 20 seconds to talk about the latest jobs numbers. Aaron O'Toole, I'll let you go first. There are new jobs, but many of them are part-time, and not many of them are in the private sector.
Exactly.
Well, over the last few years since the Great Recession, our job record is clear. Most of the million net jobs created since the depths of the recession are full-time. In fact, this week, CIBC issued a report saying that manufacturing in Ontario is coming out with some green shoots from the worst of the recession. Now, the challenge they face is the U.S. is still experiencing slow growth, and manufacturing in Ontario depends on that. But we're also opening markets in Europe, in South Korea, in Asia, to make sure that we have global markets so that if our U.S. friends remain slow and sluggish, we have new markets for our goods and services.
Francis Scarpaleggia?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that more people are working this month than last month, of course. But I don't think the government can take credit for employment growth in this country. I think population growth has been driving a certain portion of employment growth. It's kind of like a natural employment growth. And we know that 87% of the jobs that have been created around the oil patch. So, which is fine, but it's not because of the government that this is happening. It's because of markets and so outside of Canada and so on.
Well, these two parties would like to stop. Mark, you've just said. I think you've summarized it very well. Almost all of the 3/4 of them were part-time jobs that were created. Most all of which in the public sector. We have a stagnant, according to Stats Canada, a stagnant private sector employment record. 300,000 more people are not working since Mr. Harper came to be the Prime Minister. Obviously, we got to do a lot better, especially, if I can say so, Mark, for our youth who have twice the level of unemployment than others.
Thank you to all three of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark.